Welcome to Intimacy Insights. We're therapists with one mission, make sex and relationships better. So let's get some insights today. So, Sarah, we're going to be talking about green and red flags today, which I think is a really important topic for dating, whether you're in relationships, all that kind of thing. And so, Sarah, if you want to get started, we're going to go over the top red flags with their antidotes, the green flags that people should know. And so, yeah, if you want to get started with the first one.
Absolutely. I would love to. Let's get in top 10 red flags that we need to know about. Number one, pressuring, not holding or honoring boundaries.
And we know our antidote to that is someone who does honor those boundaries. We want people who, of course, show you respect. We want people who ask for consent. We want all things to be what they call SSC or safe, sane, and consensual. And we also want people who set and reinforce their own boundaries. And so when they say that they're going to do something, then we want them to be able to follow through with that. We call that integrity when people can do that. And so when we see someone who doesn't, who is saying, I'm going to do this, or this is my boundary, and then maybe they let others walk on those boundaries and are kind of passive, then that's kind of a red flag there in itself.
The opposite of letting somebody walk all over you would be number two red flag, short tempered and name calling, right? So we want to find that gray area where we're not letting people walk on us, but we don't want this person that's short tempered and name calling.
In the context of conflict, I know that things can definitely get heated sometimes and people can get really upset and have emotions and things like that. I think when it gets to that point, though, of like people having these big blow up arguments and throwing around insults, cussing each other out, name calling, all these things, with that short tempered piece too, having an overreaction to like what is going on, in
Right.
those conflicts. So, how do we tell the difference between when someone is just frustrated and maybe they're like saying things they don't mean, and then when it's actually a red flag and it's not good, and we need to get out of there in a conflict?
I think it's waiting for them to cool down a little bit and seeing, can they self regulate? Are they taking a timeout? Can they reflect and see like what could have been done different? And those would be some green flags for me.
Yeah, I think so. We see sometimes these arguments where it becomes really frustrating and then there's heavy emotion and stuff. And so, like, yeah, Sarah, what you're saying with a timeout, that is a wonderful idea. That is a wonderful idea. I recommend to all the relationships that I work with, of course. I think that sometimes what can happen is people will get really upset and maybe we will try to take that time out. And a red flag kind of goes along with this number two of people continuing to message, continuing to berate the other person and say, we need to figure this out. That is a pattern. We call that in conflict management, the pursuer and the distancer, where you have someone pursuing in a conflict and saying, we need to figure this out. The other person is trying to walk away to create space because they know they are feeling dysregulated and they need to chill out. And in this red flag scenario, you set a boundary and you say, hey, don't text me for a little bit. I need a minute to hang out. I need to take a lap, take a breather, or something like that. And they will continue to message and continue to text. So, not to get on a whole tangent with that, but you look at some of the movies from like the 90s and stuff, and the cute boyfriend who she said no, and he's still fighting for her, and he goes and throws the rocks at her window. Please,
Oh,
car. You know what I'm talking about?
yes. The radio and the rocks. Yeah. All the
Yes.
things. Yeah.
Yes. And those are the examples we were given as romantic relationships. The guy has to fight for the girl or something. And we don't actually want that. When someone says, hey, don't talk to me or leave me alone or whatever else, it is leave me alone, right? And so if they can't honor that boundary, that is a problem if they continue to text you to pursue you. And there is a difference that sometimes we just don't have the healthiest communication, and that's something that we can work on, especially if that is something that you've already addressed with this person and said, hey, when I say don't text me for a little bit, then don't text me, especially when we've addressed that and there's no growth with that, then I think that is a red flag and they need to do some work.
Absolutely. And I think what's important to say now is just one red flag doesn't mean run. It means watch, right? So if we can keep track of these flags, and when you're ranking them up and there's a lot, then that's fine. Then you do need to run, but just one is watch, right? So I think that's a good point to make here. Number three, invalidates you. Mm. This kind of goes along with some of the stuff we talked about in our last segment about narcissistic abuse. We see this a lot in validation.
You say, this is how I'm feeling, for example, and then they say, no, you're not, or we talked a lot about the gaslighting in our last video. And that's another example of that. This thing happened and I didn't like that. And then they say, no, it didn't. Or they even becoming defensive can be a distraction from what you're trying to say. So you say, hey, I didn't like that when we were out to this event yesterday, that the way you talked to me, I felt that was kind of disrespectful. Can we talk about that? Can we work through that? And then they say, well, when we went out with my friends, the way you dressed and the you were so disrespectful and whatever else, they become a little bit defensive, or they might say, well, I only talked so disrespectfully to you because you did XYZ. And so that becomes an issue because, again, that can be unhealthy communication, and we might need to work through that. We need to address that though and see if that person is willing to grow through that with us. That becomes like a distraction, the defensiveness, the pointing out. I think what do they call that, projection, if we go back to Freud's stuff, as a defense mechanism. And so in really the idea of that, the antidote is being able to compromise, to validate, hey, I hear you. That makes sense that you feel that way and things. We're going to talk about empathy and sympathy in a little bit. And so someone who can support your growth in that way and grow through that with you.
Yeah. Ew, number 4, yucky, controlling, jealous, manipulative. Yes, this is a big one. This is one that sneaks up on a lot of people, and we don't recognize that, oh, now we have like a very small circle of support, and that's because my partner doesn't like anybody or what I do or where I go. So, what are the green flags to look for with somebody in regards to the opposite of being controlling, jealous, and manipulative?
So it's going to be making sure we each have in this relationship our own individual lives, making sure that if there is some kind of jealousy, that we can talk through that. And so, this whole controlling, jealous behavior, and that is true. I think it does sneak up on a lot of people, especially because it's disguised as like insecurity or emotion. And that is a problem because, it's like, well, hey, when you go online and you talk to people, the way that makes me feel is I feel like you don't love me, or, you're not spending enough time with me. And so for those of us who are empathic, we will say, man, I don't want to do something that's going to hurt you. And so, let's talk through that. What can we do about that? What can I do on social media that's going to make you feel safe? And then of course they say, well, delete it, or don't talk to any men or any women or something like that. And so that becomes a problem. Or let me have access to your phone and let me go through it whenever I want to.
Ah, no, no, no.
Great. Which, like, things happen in relationships. I will say on my end, that is not something I ever recommend to a relationship, is to establish that, just because I think, like, on one hand, it's like you are establishing maybe trust and things like that. And it's like it would be great to have the kind of relationship where you can see someone else's phone and there's nothing that is hidden. The other thing, though, is it really encroaches on privacy. Sometimes we do that. Maybe we think we're healing through some kind of wound, and that is going to be helpful to us to have access to the phone. But, another thing is, if you don't trust someone, guaranteed you will find something on that phone 100% of the time because you're looking for it.
Absolutely. And you're looking through that lens of persecution, right? And so everything's taken out of context and it's just all icky.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a
Just avoid.
good point. The lens of persecution. I like that. Yeah, that's exactly correct. So yeah, we definitely don't want people who are dictating where we go, who we talk to, our social media, because again, this is isolating. It's so jealousy versus envy as well. We know that the definitions are: jealousy is when I'm afraid of losing what I have, and
Mm,
envy is when I want what someone else has. And so I think that jealousy can definitely both maybe can pop up in relationships. and definitely to know that it is okay to feel jealous. We're in this relationship with someone that we love or someone's that we love. And so we might feel that jealousy, and we just need to work through those emotions to recognizing them because we can't control other people and we can't control the world just to make ourselves feel better because nothing will make us feel better. It's a matter of us working through those and doing the hard work.
Absolutely. One of the hard things sometimes about a relationship is, forgiving someone after they cheat. Red flag number 5, cheating.
It was like Kelly Clarkson maybe, and it's like, the keying of the car and break the windows and next time he cheats, whatever.
Yes. Yeah. That would be an example of like reactive abuse, though, right? Where we are pushed into a corner and then we do some crazy out of pocket stuff that like we wouldn't typically do, but that would get us there. But cheating is something that you and I deal with all the time with our clients. It's something that comes up quite frequently. It brings people into therapy for sure.
I think there's been this idea societally of like once a cheater, always a cheater. And so if someone has cheated, then they need to, kind of be excommunicated from the dating pool because they cheated in the past. So I think that's a hard one because it's a widely held cultural belief that cheaters like should receive a punishment worse than death. So, I mean, I wonder about that, Sarah. Like, how do you like work through that? How do you heal, especially if you're the person who cheated?
Oh, if you're the one who cheated, definitely looking at some of those patterns. Again, it's all about patterns, right? It's looking at what led you there. And usually we cheat to shake things up or to get out of where we're at. And so what's missing, right? What did we miss in the communication with our partner? What was missing for us that we were seeking outside of the relationship? And then how do we get those needs met within the relationship or relationships that we are already in?
That's a really good point. Yeah, I do think that I mean, you're right. We work through infidelity recovery all the time where, and I think maybe this is a whole separate video in itself, but relationships will come in and they say, "Hey, this thing happened, a boundary break." And by the way, cheating, the definition of that is not always like a sexual relationship or some kind of affair that we think of. Sometimes it's just a boundary break, whether they were messaging another person, whether even if you're in a polyamorous relationship and we said, hey, this behavior isn't okay, I'm not okay with that yet, and then they go ahead and do that, even if it's simple as physical contact, kissing, just messaging someone else. Cheating is the definition that your relationship establishes. And I definitely think that is something that each relationship, I mean, maybe not first date material, but maybe that is a topic at the beginning somewhere where we should talk about it and say, hey, what is your definition of cheating? What is okay? What is not okay? Other questions to consider. What is okay to share with other people outside of our relationship? What do we want to keep in our relationship? There's so many questions. And again, that's a whole separate topic in itself about establishing your relationship agreement. So anyway, but going back to cheating, that it does happen and we can learn and grow from those mistakes. We definitely need to do the work on that. And as Sarah, you're saying about, looking at those patterns and things.
Yeah. And it's, again, one red flag is a watch, more than that is a run, right? So we're looking at cheating as like, can we come back from that? Do we want to? And is it a continued pattern of behavior? All right, number 6, no healthy hobbies or self-care, poor currents and or past relationships, excuse me. So having none of your own stuffs.
Yeah, and we want that. We want, those people that, so the antidote, having those healthy relationships, being able to have healthy relationships with our family, our friends, our past partners, watching how they treat pets and animals. So that is something you think about a job interview, which a lot of times that's the metaphor I use as dating is a job interview. And so that's what they do in an interview. They will call your past employers and say, hey, how was this person when they worked for you? So ideally, I know this is going to sound a bit out there. Ideally, if you were dating someone and you were trying to vet them to see if they would be a healthy partner for you, ideally, you might actually talk to a past partner and say, how was your relationship? I know that sounds a little strange. That's not, I think, too wild, especially when we're talking about polyamory, or open relationships. That is a good practice to take is let me talk to your other partners to see, what they think of you. And also in BDSM and kink, of course, we want to talk to whoever, past dominants or submissives or anyone like that to appropriately vet them. If you're dating someone and it's a train wreck with every relationship and they tell you every ex I've ever had was crazy,
Crazy.
yes, that's a concern because what happened that you couldn't end any of those relationships in a healthy way? Now, I will say, like, there's okay, it doesn't occur in a vacuum and stuff. Although, on the other end, there are just some situations too where it might have been that situation. We might have had some wild past partners, and
Mhm.
maybe that we weren't the red flag. Maybe it was just, poor fortune, or there's a lot of unhealthy people
Yeah,
out there. So, yeah, so in practicing self-care, you're right, having your own stuff, having your own individual activities and social life, which I suggest is a great vetting question on a first date, is asking, what does a day in the life look like for you? And if
yeah,
they say, well, I don't know, I wake up, not that video games are a bad thing, but if I'm playing video games all day and I don't work. I don't talk to anyone. I don't text anyone. I don't take care of myself. Like, then that's a little bit of a concern and maybe a red flag we want to take a look at.
absolutely. I definitely think this is one to look at the beginning and vetting, which I can't wait to do our video on. This is one that goes throughout the relationship where it's really easy to lose your identity, with your partner, that they just start doing everything that you do. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought you had all this stuff. But that's a red flag when they start to just do all the things you want to do and they don't have their own, or you get sucked into doing all the things they want to do and you don't have your own. So I think like just keeping that in the back of your mind throughout the relationship is so important, and keeping some things separate, having separate friend groups, having separate things that you like to do and hobbies. We ready for number 7?
Yeah, go for it.
Lacking empathy. Mm,
Yeah. Lacking empathy. So empathy and sympathy are different. Empathy, if we define that, that is understanding. I understand what it's like to feel how you're feeling. If someone is crying, then I'm not sad too. I'm not crying too, but I do understand what it's like to feel sad because I've been there. And so that is empathy. Some of us will say we are empaths, which means generally it's kind of a spiritual identification and generally means I can feel aware or hyper aware of other people's emotions. However, a lot of people will use that term incorrectly because the term is actually I'm a sympath. And those two things are different because sympathy means that someone is crying and I am crying with them and I feel sad alongside with them. And so each have their role in different scenarios, empathy and sympathy. And so we want to watch that because being a sympath means we might be absorbing other people's emotions a little bit too much, and that we don't have healthy emotional boundaries if we are just feeling what everyone else is feeling all the time, and that's super draining for us. That empathy does basically mean that we do have those boundaries. So yeah, we want someone who offers that empathy and validation. It makes sense that you feel that way. I hear you. You can have empathy for someone even if you don't agree, that maybe they feel upset at you. Your partner feels upset at you, and maybe you don't agree that they should feel upset at you. However, you can honor their feelings and, hey, it makes sense that you feel upset, and I get that. I empathize with that, and I hear you.
I like that we differentiated empathy and sympathy. That one's always hard for people. Number 8, no accountability. Never my fault.
And it's always yours, not mine. So we do want that. We do want that, the self-responsibility. And again, like with the defensiveness, instead of becoming defensive when we bring things up and projecting and saying, well, you did this, or I only did this because of this reason. Instead, self-responsibility looks like, okay, I hear that. That makes sense. Maybe in the future I could do it a little bit different, or I can understand how you felt this way because of something that I did. And so I can change that for the future so that we can learn from each other and grow. And then we want someone who is dependable. So again, this goes along with that integrity that they do what they say they're going to do. And when we ask them to do something and they commit to the thing, then, they'll show up for you and they'll be there.
Number 9, making threats. This one seems like it'd be very overt and easy to see, but it can be covert too, right?
Yes. And I think that's a good point to bring up is I think when we think of making threats and we look in the dictionary of what a threat looks like, we're looking at the person who is intense, who is threatening physical harm, or something like that. And it actually can be like tiny stuff, that they'll start to threaten about.
The overt threats would be the ones that are easy to see, right? Where like I'm going to this if you do this. So like I will end the relationship if you don't wash the dishes this week. And that's a big one, like a big threat for a little thing, right? But it's like manipulation. And then the smaller covert ones are well, I wish you would do this because it makes me want to do this when you don't, right? Like where you're feeling manipulated.
Those little ones that build up over time, and oftentimes too, like they're not they're not like promises of something that they're going to do or not going to do. They are just empty threats, a self-despair thing where it's like, well, then I guess I'll just, well, then I guess I just won't attend. I'm not going at all because whatever, because you refuse to delete your Facebook or you're talking to other people, friends or something like that. I think that, yeah, that those things can build up over time and that they are tiny, but then it might get to those big overt ones of threatening the relationship, which by the way, in an argument, when we are dysregulated, we know that our heart and our mind and our breathing and all these things are dysregulated. That is not the time to talk about ending a relationship, no matter like how you feel. You need to take a deep breath and you need to go to a separate room and you need to calm down and get regulated again. And then if it's serious and you're going to actually want to end a relationship, sit down when you're cool, calm, collected, and be honest. And we'll talk about how to break up with someone in a future video, but be honest and say, hey, this is the situation, right? We're not threatening to burn it all down just because we feel upset, because this is part of this red flag.
All right, number 10, the last one we have for today, no emotional vulnerability. Yeah,
Yeah.
this one kind of connects to a lot of them, but can definitely stand alone.
They can't identify their own emotions. They can't share them in a healthy way. Now, some people with avoidant attachment style, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, the attachment styles in the future, with avoidant attachment, they do have that issue of I don't even know how I feel. And possibly because the attachment growing up was there wasn't a caregiver or parent who honored the way I felt anyway. And so now I don't have any practice with identifying my emotions and being able to share them. And so, how do we change that? We go to counseling and we learn those skills and learn about assertive communication, boundary setting, all that stuff. So, I feel statements. The antidote here, the green is the I feel statements. Hey, I feel frustrated because of XYZ. I feel concerned because of XYZ. I feel jealous because of whatever is going on. And so, being able to share, identify, and then share those emotions is really important as a green flag, of course.
I guess that wraps everything up, but in conclusion, we need to say that it's possible that we who are listening have some of these red flags, right? So it's like you said, do the work. And most of that work is going to be going to therapy and having somebody who can kind of mirror things for you and tell you, like, you know what, you are right. That might be a place where you can have some growth. And this is how to do it. I think it's important to know that just because you're listening to this doesn't mean that you're exempt from the list. And that, we all have places where we can do some work. And this is definitely one of them so that we can be ready to be in a healthy, loving relationship.
And that is an excellent point, And so, yeah, for the people that you date, this is a great list. For the people that you're not even dating, your friends and your family, this is a great list. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, for you, certainly, and these red flags are going to be different than needs and desires in a relationship. And so needs and desires in a relationship are just the things I need and I want out of a person. So this is your old list from elementary school of tall, dark, and handsome. But now today would look like, okay, well, I want someone maybe of the same, faith or spirituality as me, or I want someone either who's local or long distance or something like that. And so those are our needs and desires, but these red flags are universal. So if you have these red flags and you notice some things within yourself, go ahead and do the work on that. And I think that wraps us up on this list for today.
Yes. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great day and be well.